Back there, I could fly a gunship. I could drive a tank. I was in charge of $1 million equipment. Back here, I can't even hold a job washing cars. The dichotomy runs deeper. For American John Rambo, Vietnam War hero and Congressional Medal of Honor winner, returns to a society that bears little resemblance to the military culture of brutal discipline and clearly defined rules. Follow orders, complete the mission, watch my back, I'll watch yours. In post-Vietnam War America, soldiers are an unfortunate reminder of America's shame, and like old racehorses with broken legs, are neglected and effectively left to die. But for this veteran, being ignored was something he could handle. Being disrespected, that was something he just couldn't allow. Having lost everything, his friends, his career, his purpose in life, all he had left was his honor. He was not about to let anyone take that away from him.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Military-industrial complex.
A new world order.
But we are here to destroy the control over the industry of other people.
I did not trade arms for hostages.
It's been time, dearly.
Welcome to the Myth of the 20th Century. This is a special After Dark episode where we're going to be talking about John J. Rambo, First Blood, Part 1. The first movie in the series that made Stallone even more famous after the Rocky series. And this film is actually somewhat underrated compared to the others, but in, I think, our opinion, is actually one of the best, and it has some meaning regarding the role of veterans and their integration into American society after wars. And so with that, I'd like to introduce my co-hosts, Nick.
Hey.
Alex.
Hello.
And Hank.
Rambo did nothing wrong.
I agree. So what do you guys think about
Well, it's a good Christmas movie. I mean, we're on the holiday, the Christmas Yuletide spirit. It is a Christmas movie. If you guys caught that, I don't know.
You know, I noticed the decorations, and I don't think it's actually that not snowy where that was filmed. It was actually filmed in Canada, but it's supposed to take place in Oregon, I believe. But you tell me, Nick, is that correct?
Well, in the police station, they have a Merry Christmas banner, and it is a Christmas.
Is there enough snow on the ground
Christmas
for that time of year?
Well, it's not really clear. The movie, I don't think it makes clear. I mean, it's a fake place, Hope.
Well, but it's north of Portland. That's clear. That much is clear because he says he's.
Well, north of Portland is Washington.
Right, but
Right.
So I think it. Okay, so yeah, good. So
Yeah, there's plenty of places. Yeah, no, there's plenty of places around the Puget Sound and Olympic Peninsula that they don't. It doesn't get snowy.
Yeah,
The parts. Yeah.
Well, it certainly looks like that part of the world with that kind of evergreen.
I don't know how much attention was paid to detail on this, though.
Well, let's just say
That's
it's
where
fairly accurate because I think given how much proximity to the ocean they have and having visited that part of the world, I think that's about right. I mean, even Vancouver, which is obviously past.
A lot of stuff gets shot in the Northwest that they want to set in all kinds of other places.
Mm-hmm.
Like Twin Peaks, I believe, was shot in Bend. The Shining famously was shot I had two locations. One was the actual hotel, which I think is in Oregon. I could be wrong about that.
No, it's in Colorado.
The actual hotel's in... Okay, so then I have it backwards. Like the actual hotel, but then there were other parts of it that I think were shot in Oregon. Like when they drive in, I think that's in Oregon, but not clear about that exactly.
Right. Well, I've always thought it interesting that the signage and everything actually is very similar to what you'd expect in an American town. And I guess the Canadian sort of, or the Americanization of the world has actually been... well underway since, I guess, 1982 when that movie came out. But I guess we're kind of going off into commentary. Let's set up the scene. So the movie
we could
opens.
assume, are we going to assume everyone's seen film. I mean,
Well, let's
hasn't
kick it
seen
off
Rambo?
and maybe go through a little bit of what happens, in case people haven't.
I think we should. Yeah, we should be total spoiler alert here. We're gonna give you the plot of the movie.
People
Go
haven't
watch the
seen the
movie.
movie.
If you haven't seen it, go watch it and come back.
Exactly.
It's very worthwhile.
Yeah, it's an underrated film. I mean, it wasn't as geared to kind of a lower brow audience, I think, and it was they couldn't even find an actor when they originally were pitching this to some of the bigger names, and they ended up with Stallone, and that's what kind of catapulted his career a little bit.
It was in development hell for like over a decade.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, the word kind of wound down by 73, so.
And I even wonder, what year is it supposed to take place in? I mean, does it take place in 1981 or does it take place in 1975, you know?
Somewhere thereabouts, I guess. It probably is
Well,
okay either way.
there's some hints to that in the. Okay, so he goes to visit. So Rambo shows up in this town of Hope, and he goes to visit an old army buddy of his, and finds out that he had died the year prior
From Agent Orange in Vietnam.
from Agent Orange. So that gives some indication of when it would be, because presumably Stallone, Rambo had just kind of gotten back himself. So yeah, probably like 77 or 78.
Or even earlier, because his buddy brought it back. His mother says that he came back with cancer, that he got in Vietnam. So it may be 1970, 1971.
Okay, but somewhere in there.
It's actually based on a novel that was released in 1972.
All right,
the
there you
novel
go.
differs substantially from the book, or the from the movie.
Let's go to the next part. So he gets in, and the trouble begins when a cop spots him. So anybody want to take it from there?
Yeah, so Rambo kind of he's a bum. Obviously, it's Sylvester Stallone, so he's not looking too scraggly, especially not by modern standards. But he's wearing a beat up old army jacket, and he's got the long hair that at the time is gonna mark you as somebody with no particular fixed address, no particular occupation. So at that time, when a lot of veterans were coming back, they weren't sort of integrated immediately into society, and a lot of them came back with severe drug habits. A lot of people had gone to Vietnam to avoid prison in the first place. So a lot of these returning vets were associated with bringing petty crime and drugs into whatever towns they were going back to. So the sheriff sort of immediately takes a dislike to John Rambo, and he basically tries to run him out of town after Rambo stops him and asks him for directions.
Well, doesn't the sheriff just stop him? Doesn't he just like see him and immediately just?
No, he
Yeah.
says,
Fantastic.
where are you headed? And he's like, north, and then let me give you a ride, help you out a little bit, hop in. And he drives him north, and then he says, where are you trying to get to? He's like, Portland, south. And then basically, Stallone's like, why are you pushing me?
Well, you pushing me.
Yeah. And it gets better later on that dimension. But basically, he's, he's asking, is there a place I can get a place to eat around here? And the sheriff says, yeah, about 30 miles up the road, and I'll get you head started. He's like, is there a law against getting something to eat here? And he says, yeah, me. And then they kind of get into why, as Hank pointed out, they don't want.
Hank should explain. Hank did a really good job of explaining like the difference in the hierarchy and the challenge to the hierarchy. Because I was so puzzled as to why the cop really cared that much. I mean, admittedly, I didn't grow up in the 1970s, and it was a much more traditional society then, where breaking the rules and having long hair and all that sort of thing would be more.
One comment, Hank should go on. One thing he does say is he indicates the American flag on his army jacket.
You know,
And
I
he's
noticed
like-
that. I was surprised.
He
that
says-
a small town.
Well, yeah,
sheriff would have a problem.
what he says is, you know, in his this kind of intimidating way, is like, you may run into some trouble wearing that, looking like that, implying that like his jacket is dirty and his hair is long, and yet he has an American flag on it. So somehow it's a disgrace to the American flag.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a sacred symbol.
Right. Yes, of course.
Well, look, people should have sacred symbols, and that's what we have, for better or worse. So you just to understand where the dick cop is coming from.
There's also a duality that gets explored throughout the movie where you have John Rambo, his backstory is eventually explained that he's a bona fide war hero. He's a Green Beret. He's received the Medal of Honor. He's evidently extremely experienced and skilled in sort of insurgent warfare. And this is contrasted with this kind of neutered civil authority of the local cops, where they're not really concerned about having status based on their participation in a warrior culture. The culture of a cop is sort of a podunk honor culture, where they're concerned above all else with maintaining their spot on top of a social hierarchy because they can enforce their place on top of the social hierarchy.
I think that's right, with the exception of putting the word honor in it. I think it's actually more about like just keeping power. I mean,
that's what I mean about honor culture. So in an honor culture, like the easiest way to get in trouble with a cop is by offending their precious honor.
It's
which
the culture of the herder. People
is
who have to keep face.
Yeah, it's things like that's why the libertarian thing is so triggering to both sides. Actually, the whole like, am I being detained? It's like, explain why you're doing what you're doing. It's like, no, I don't have to explain anything because I'm better than you. So that's just one of the ways that kind of plays out
on both sides. Exactly. The Rambo character and the sheriff character actually display this sort of pride, and you can see that Rambo isn't just like this all the time, because in the opening scene he comes to talk to the mother of his friend from Vietnam, and he's actually very friendly and respectful because he's not feeling like he's being challenged. But when the sheriff does what he does, he just shuts down, and he's very kind of gruff and a little bit passive aggressive, and then it just escalates. And the whole movie is basically them fighting each other.
Well, that's the entire dynamic of the movie is escalation. That's and you see this in there's other 70s movies. This is kind of reminds me also of Vanishing Point, similar kind of dynamic, but it just goes from the initial provocation to escalation to like blowing up the gas station in the town. And you kind of got to wonder, I mean, to Hank's point, it's like, well, why is it that they continue? Because eventually they bring in the colonel, Rambo's colonel, once. So he goes they take him to the police station, and then there's this over-the-top sadistic cop who's friends with I guess he's the sheriff, right? Character who...
Yeah, he's one of the deputies, but he's got
the chief deputy.
He's got the canonical mustache, and
he and the protruding, pouring out gut.
Like, he's got the gut, exactly. Swaggering attitude. Everything is a joke to him, and I'm going to show you.
Yeah, and he immediately he wants to, in sort of a petty power kind of position, wants to torment. He's a very over the top. He's a very over the top character, and it's really his actions that lead to the rest of the movie. And
he ends up dying. I mean, he falls out of the helicopter.
He's the first person to actually die.
Further escalates the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole movie is, I would say, do you guys think this is fair to say that it's a very anti-cop movie?
Extremely.
Yeah.
Is there a more anti-cop movie than this movie?
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah, but you have to think
Serpico.
about it.
Maybe that's, too realistic, but that one's a little bit more, accurate probably.
I mean, the most anti-cop movies are the movies that the cops shoot of themselves, which you can find many examples on YouTube.
I mean, you got like Training Day and Bad Lieutenant.
I think
Training Day was more mixed because
those
Ethan Hawke
aren't
played
anti-cop
an honest
movies. Those are cops as anti-hero movies, which are completely different.
Yeah, that's a fair point, actually. Yeah, it's a very anti-cop movie in the sense that, like, I mean, these people are unwilling to de-escalate the situation because they're unwilling to cede any kind of any of their petty little domain.
Right, which is the most true to life.
Yeah, it's
the representation possible because
it's the metaphysical pig.
Yeah, literally all that they have going for them is their ability to escalate and be condoned by the full power of the state when they do escalate.
Right. It's funny too when they do show the state police as being a little bit more reasonable, I guess you could say, because he kind of, when the state police come in after the escalation goes down when the sadistic pig cop starts torturing Rambo, and he basically has like Vietnam flashbacks over the straight razor, because that's the other thing. He was the flashbacks show that he was also a prisoner of war at some point. Not really clear what happened, if he like escaped or if he was finally let out. You think because actually in Rambo 2, that's like the main plot, is they go back and try to bust out some prisoners of war, and there's all this machinations with the high command. But so he flips out of prison and beats the shit out of the entire police force, runs out in his street, steals a motorbike, and goes off into the woods where he and of course grabs his knife. They take his knife from him, his one most valuable possession, and so on his way out of the police station, he makes sure to grab his knife. And
this is a thing that you see in a lot of 80s movies, especially. They have these kind of symbolic objects of the knife and later the M60 that he shoots from the hip, and both of those become kind of the totems in the later films.
Right, exactly.
And the bullet belts and all that.
He passed up a chance to grab all sorts of goodies at the police station when he was kung fuing his way out of containment.
Oh yeah, and you saw, because you see him eyeing the gun locker early on, so he knows where the armaments are.
He does that multiple times. There was a gun store later in the movie where he doesn't take anything. But I just want to comment actually on the realism of the survivalist aspect of the movie. The knife is actually one of the best tools you can take with you. It's lightweight. It's very versatile. You can hunt with it. You can kill with it. You can cut with it, obviously. And he basically starts out with literally like a T-shirt. It's like an undershirt. And he's running out of the cop station. It's very interesting to see what his choices are about what he prioritizes of what he needs to
they take his jacket. They take his olive drab army jacket, and so when he first gets into the woods, he's looking for some
kind
of
freeze to death. I mean,
protection.
Before we get to the woods, though, he grabs a moped. That's the first thing that
he grabbed the motorbike. Yes,
apprehends, steals, liberates.
Yeah, and so then there's a kind of a pretty good chase, but the sheriff chases him through town, and then they leads him into the woods where Rambo then starts getting back to business, looking for the essentials, and he gets a tarp, cuts it up, and makes it a poncho and some cordage and all of that.
Right.
And then they bring the entire force to bear, and that's when the escalation gets serious, because they chase him with dogs down a cliffside, and then the pot-bellied pig sadist starts just taking pot shots at him with I guess presumably a .22 from a helicopter.
It was a bigger rifle. Had a
308
scope on it. Could have been. Yeah. The one confusion I had was that at some point he gets an M16. I don't know where that happened, but he did get that.
Well, that's when they bring in. I mean, they bring in the National Guard later and stuff. But this is the way the cop dies. He's climbing down the hill or down the cliffside, and he's going to be shot, so he just jumps. And then when the cop doesn't give up and they bring the helicopter down to try and execute him, and he throws a rock at the chopper, and the cop falls out of the chopper and onto the rocks below and cracks his skull open.
Yeah, and the jump itself was actually interesting to me because I've often wondered actually if you could survive landing in tree branches, because he was really high up. I mean, it was probably 200 feet, and onto solid rock, and so that would kill you at a lower height. But basically, he sees that there's this really big, fir tree, and he starts progressively hitting bigger and bigger branches that are slowing his fall, and then he ultimately, cuts himself. I mean, it's extremely dangerous, but he didn't actually injure himself from the fall itself. And I do believe that's fairly realistic, because I've heard they may be apocryphal, but I've heard stories of pilots ejecting, and they've been able to, their parachute didn't open, and they've been able to survive by going through trees. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, Yugoslavia, who did the same sort of thing, where they just had, for whatever reason, they were launched from an airplane, and maybe their chute didn't open. I thought that there was an aspect of like savage humanity versus civilization. You want to save that for later? Like, so when I put this in my notes, when Rambo puts the knife to is it Dennehy's throat? Basically, after he's wounded all of Dennehy's men, the sheriff's, he's wounded all the sheriff's men, who's played by Robert Dennehy. He's wounded all of his men, or he's just ripped their little scouting party apart, and the cops are completely, toothless when they're in the woods. Not completely, but they're not doing so well in the woods. They're out of their element. And Rambo is totally in his element, and he's taking them apart. He puts the blade to his throat, and he basically tells him, I forget exactly the line. What does he say? He says, "Don't push it, or I'll give you a war you won't believe."
I'll give you a war you're not going to believe.
And I thought, like, that, at that point, in an earlier society, that would have been it. Anytime before, I don't know, like, the managerial revolution or one of these revolutions after the 19th century, any time before that, people would have said, okay, well, you've clearly demonstrated your superiority over us, and hail, and we'll let you go.
I wonder about that. I don't know.
No, that's a great point, Alex. I think I actually agree completely. I think that's the whole point, is that they will never stand down. He gives them every opportunity. Like right after the pig falls out of the chopper, he approaches them from below. They're standing on the cliffside with rifles. Well, I didn't do anything. And he actually, I think he asked him too. He's like, "What did I do?" And then they just start shooting at it. They won't even answer the question, because that's the joke. It's like, and as I mentioned before, when the state cops show up and he's kind of portrayed it subtly. He's not really a very prominent character, but he's portrayed as far more cool-headed. And in the conversation with the colonel, like, he overhears this. He eventually gets a whiff of the fact that these cops were like abusing him, and that like he actually didn't do anything, and they're responsible for this entire situation. He kind of is looking askance at the sheriff.
Well, here's the thing that I want to point out, and I don't know if this has changed or not, but I think the dynamic is that this guy is a small town sheriff, and he's the king essentially of the law in that little kingdom. And somebody's come in and demonstrated his inability to keep the law and order, and that's a big blow to his ego. And how could he allow a guy who's already taken out one of his deputies and proceeded to embarrass the entire force and get away? How could he go back to the town and still retain the respect that he wants for himself?
Well, but how is it but that's kind of the thing that Alex is pointing out. It's like, how really is it an embarrassment that you just got shown up by this like hardcore Green Beret commando?
Well, you could have handed it over to maybe the higher levels of jurisdiction.
Or you could do the obvious thing. You're like, oh shit, he got away.
Yeah, which is what the colonel with Troutman, I think his name was advising them to do.
Yeah,
that was the whole thing. It's just
this
let
is
him
the question
go.
of honor. I mean, is that honorable? Like, if you do believe that the guy is a threat, you just sort of pass the buck.
He's not. They don't. But they objectively. It's not that he's a threat.
They do and they don't. There's legitimate arguments that he is a threat, and then at the same time they started the fucking thing. But it's like he's not exactly doing everything in a civil way. I mean, he steals a motorbike. He throws the guy out of a truck. There's a few things that were not exactly called for.
If you had like a bear wander into town, I mean, it's like,
Yeah, but he's a human. Come on, you got to have a
But
no, but he's
traditional society, people, what they would do is they would say, wow, the sheriff is the real badass, but this guy was such a badass that he was able to overtake the sheriff. It's the same thing with the shaman. If the shaman isn't able to use, witch doctor medicine to heal someone, that just means that the sickness or the demon that was in the sick man was so powerful that it wasn't able to overtake the shaman's magic.
Sure. I hear you. That's the thing, though, about kind of, do you want to have any law at all, or is it just going to be constantly people can challenge each other with physical force? And the whole concept of
well, really, the solution to this is Rambo should have been made sheriff.
Yeah.
That's how it would have been done at a certain point in history. Sure. I don't know how far back you have to go, but the concept of having a sheriff is that he has the right to use force when others can't.
Yeah, but he's the one endangering the town.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just sort of, this is what the choice the modern society has taken, and maybe there's a reason for it, maybe there isn't. But it's sort of like kind of like, do you, like, if you become a vigilante, like, who gave you that authority, and then is that something that the people can agree is the right way to go?
You guys, I don't remember the exact incident, but do you guys know the story? Like, after World War II, there was, I believe, if I recall,
Athens,
yeah,
Georgia.
Athens. It was in Athens, and I believe that was I think that was the inspiration for the film Walking Tall to some extent.
That was slightly different.
It was a different scenario, but you know exactly what I'm talking about, though, Hank. So you can go ahead.
Yeah. So Athens, Georgia, was this situation where you had in 1945, all of the veterans started returning to this area that had been taken over in their absence by this sort of cabal of crooked county officials, including the sheriff and his deputies. Basically, everybody who is enough of a scumbag or just old enough they didn't end up fighting in the Second World War. So the veterans returning basically politely requested that they not be harassed, extorted, etc. by these corrupt local county officials, and were told to go fuck themselves. So they managed to liberate a large quantity of weapons from the local armory, which they were intimately familiar with, being returning combat veterans. And they basically staged a armed uprising that culminated with the local sheriff and his deputies retreating to the county jail, which was then dynamited open to extract these guys and ensure a free and fair election. It's a heartwarming story of the use of arms to protect one's constitutionally guaranteed natural rights.
And so, Hank, the feds did not put these guys into prison for the rest of their lives, I take it?
No, not really.
What do you imagine would happen now if someone?
Well, yeah,
Waco.
I could see it.
Media
I could
firestorm.
see it going a few different ways because there was much less communication at that time. The situations are just too different to really contemplate, but in general, historically there was like a thing that was like, oh, this is the king's man. This is like our warrior caste, and they derive prestige because they fight on our behalf, so that the Mongols or whatever don't come and rape all the livestock and steal all the women. And you can contrast that with the notion of a police force where there's not even the claim that they're really protecting you from an external enemy. It's just the guy that was put in charge to make sure that you keep on paying your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really that much different than, your local lord enforces prima nocte or whatever, abuses of the peasants he's going to enact. But there's not even the fig leaf of, they're protecting us from these like bad, dangerous outsiders. That at best is this claim that they're sort of protecting you in some sense from yourself. So that's another reason why there's this kind of contrast between the purely civil armed authority and the military armed authority, and the kind of relative legitimacy of those two.
Yeah, this is also before the advent of the paramilitary death squads known as SWAT teams. And
and also before there was a fetish for this kind of heroization. Like, I didn't think that was really a thing before 9/11 or so. Even in the late 90s, you didn't have this meme of hero cops or of our brave protectors or whatever.
So that reminds me of one aspect of the film that I sort of objected to, or maybe didn't even objected, but I just made note of. And I almost wonder if this is. I said in the notes, I wondered in the notes if there was any social engineering aspect to it, and I now realize that there may have been, because the colonel, was it Troutman?
Mm-hmm.
Colonel Troutman and Rambo are presented as like completely competent, and Rambo is dangerous killing machine. He's somehow the U.S. government has managed to make this super soldier of Rambo who's able to do all these things to the cops. And it reminded me of there's a blogger whom I like called the Saker. I guess he's a Swiss white Russian exile descendant, and he's made the point that like the U.S. is actually not good at special operations, and like actual cases where the U.S. has done special operations when it's not just it's not just clouded by conspiracy theories of propaganda. They're not that good compared to the British or the Germans or the Russians.
I've heard the British are probably the best special forces.
SAS.
Yeah, they're very good. The thing is, like, they have a lot of imperial practice. Okay, the Russians are tough. There's that funny meme of like the U.S. Army carrying a log, and then they show like the Russian like woman carrying a bigger log. I mean, it's just like like the Russians are hardcore, but they also they just train them by like throwing them in ice water. It's not very sophisticated. Yeah. And the British are good, and they've got this like global footprint and the history of that. And I think they also carry themselves with a little bit of more like European elan versus like the Americans were like, I'm a fucking badass, and then you basically just get like run out of European militaries when you talk like that because it's sort of arrogant and overconfident. So yeah, I think you're right.
Historically, the British were better at inserting themselves into local populations than Americans were. That much is true for sure.
Yeah, the Americans don't really bother. They're just like, hey, we're here, we're Americans. You want to be an American too, right?
We're on steroids. Look at our pointy beards.
Or just welcome the B-52 if you don't.
It's a little bit of a digression because obviously this is a work of fiction, but even as a work of fiction, it's kind of unrealistic in the translation between some sort of kind of abstracted special operations woods ninja type thing. Like, these guys never, ever, ever operate alone. You will almost always, have another guy there with you. And this kind of
Rambo did have a team. I mean, they're all dead. But...
Well, right, yeah.
Well,
but
when he's doing
when he's in the woods doing his,
in the actual movie proper, yeah.
Yeah, and needless to say, the kind of scenarios that are posited there are unrealistic, like firing the two-man medium machine gun from the hip while he's also loading the belts from across his shoulders. Like,
but it looks cool.
This is it's an action movie. You kind of take as a given premise that, okay, well, we have this man that is a super soldier. He's the exemplar of all of the military virtues, but he's still only one man, and that's where the actual conflict comes in. Not who's going to be like kind of a better soldier than him. But just how it plays out when you have one soldier versus an entire state.
Well, that's another aspect of it, the system aspect. But I just see it as, maybe I'm crazy, but I see it as one of the, maybe not the first, but midway or at the early part of this progression that ends in the butt-kicking babe. And like people find, they find Rambo firing an M60 from the hip or whatever it was in this film. They find that compelling. And just as they find today, it's been a ratchet effect where today normal people find the butt-kicking babe to be compelling. Like they watch that on TV and they don't think that it's off-puttingly unrealistic.
It's because they don't live in a real society. I mean, it's just a bubble. It's like everybody.
Yeah, you have people who literally go years without lifting anything that weighs more than 20 pounds.
Well, I'm always shocked when people are like telling me like, "Oh man, my laptop is so light." I'm like, it wasn't really that heavy to begin with. It's like what, 5 pounds, 8 pounds? That's hard.
It's not like you're hiking with that over mountain passes
like
where you're
they're walking down their stairs to their Uber, and they're complaining about the weight of their laptop. It's pathetic.
Wait, so Alex, what's your? You're talking about the potential social engineering angle, or what exactly were you saying?
I think I'm a bit mixed up. There's different threads. So there's the thread of the social engineering where the U.S. government is trying to. I mean, this is definitely a thing I've just sort of picked up. I suspect that this is a thing that they've tried to push. This idea that the Navy SEALs and Army Special Forces, Delta Force, these are super elite soldiers. And I'm not saying that like those outfits don't exist and that they're not very capable steroid using combat soldiers, right. But this idea that like they're Steven Seagal, like Under Siege, like that they're just super soldiers and they can kill 50 men single-handedly. Like people like to imagine that their state has men like that, and then the government's happy for them to think that. So that's one thread.
Dude, there's like whole chapters of that play out exactly that, and they're like, Achilles, he was such a badass. His sword was 3 times
but that's the thing.
Anyone else's.
There was in the ancient world, there was more opportunity for not just the ancient world. I mean, the medieval world as well. There was more opportunity for individual valor, which is, I think, that's why you get into the hagiography of a man like Chris Kyle. Because this is a guy who you can say individually was responsible for, X number of scalps. I think it was like 119 or something like that. So I think that's why you end up with because you want, Alex is totally right. Like that there's an appeal of that, the individual hero, the individual like badass warrior. And, looking at it now, like where are you going to find it? Well, it's going to be someone like a sniper, because you're not going to have a guy facing, men openly on the battlefield with a sword and hacking 50 of them apart or whatever it is. So I think that
Richard Marcinko, there's another character in this vein. I mean, it's not just the U.S. The Russians do it too. I think I said in the notes, like I think Kalashnikov is a fictional character mostly, or recently the Russians claimed that one man in Syria, he was going to get overrun, so he called
right.
That's probably a fake story, right?
I don't know.
There's probably we don't know if there's truth to it or not.
There's propaganda,
but it is obviously used as
going either way.
Sure.
Because you really don't actually want to be captured alive by
ISIS.
People.
Well, that's the thing with
anyone in that region where their primary occupation is like finding the tightest goat in the village.
Right, exactly. But at the same time, like, you see it with who is the other recent hagiographical Michael Murphy and those guys. They did a film, Lone Survivor, about them.
Oh yeah. That was actually pretty good. No, it was okay.
Okay, film. I mean, it hits all the right notes. Their fate was sealed. Their fate was sealed when they chose not to kill some goat herders, and that's like what it's that humanitarian American imperialism is like what led to this.
Like, what's the big
so
deal?
Much of it just strikes the notes of Hollywood. I mean, but more to my point, it's like the fetishization of these guys is completely divorced from what they actually do. It's like, oh well, they're badasses and they're good shooters and they have some other skills, but it's nowhere along the line does the honor or praise accorded to them by the guys in America watching Sean Hannity wearing like Navy SEAL hats or something. Nowhere does it have anything to do with what they actually do. And here in this is actually kind of on the flip side, where it's like the cops and stuff, they don't really care what he did. It's like the Vietnam War, whatever. There's a line where the sheriff says, lots of people went through hell in that war. You know, why is this guy special? Oh, he's special because he's a more advanced killing machine.
There is a moment, though, where it comes over the radio that he's like a Medal of Honor winner.
Yeah, right.
Dennehy's face is just like, oh, shit, what have I done?
Well, because he knows, and because there's another line, because he knows what follows up. I think it's the colonel who says this to him. It's like, here you're going to have on his gravestone, John Rambo, Medal of Honor winner, Green Beret, killed for vagrancy. So he knows. I mean, that's what the cop's worried about. Is he knows how bad it's going to look once it comes out that he killed this war hero for being a vagrant.
Yeah,
because this is after they think he's dead. Because they chase him. They bring the National Guard in, and they chase him into the mouth of this mine, and then they shoot an M23 law. What do they call this thing?
It's a law. It's a
long arm of the law.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever want like a nice, metonymy, what is that Greek rhetorical device? It's like, yeah, you literally try to kill him with the law.
Yeah, right, exactly. And he, it's funny too, because the guy who does the like captain of the National Guard or whatever is like he works at the drugstore. And so when the sheriff like comes and they're trying to dig out his body and find his body, it's like, well, who's going to do this? Well, you're going to do this. And it's like, but I have to be at the drugstore tomorrow.
Well, I thought it was interesting that the majority of those guys were pretty much reluctant to actually do the job, and it kind of is a commentary on what the National Guard effectively is. It's basically an additional paycheck for a lot of people these days. I mean, if you go into any airport and you hear people like, oh yeah, my sister's in the Air Force or in the National Guard, you're like, did she feel, the call, of the nation, calling her to defend the nation? There's all these crazy people that basically just show up in that system. And it's like, what is the military today? I think that's part of the disconnect between the small town and this guy who's wandering through the town. It's like he's an outsider. And we're not a unified nation. And the conflicts the United States has been engaged in have been so far outside the territory of the United States that to most normal American citizens, they seem very abstract, and they don't exactly appreciate maybe what these men are going through. And even if it isn't for their direct benefit, the men who are, in the case of Vietnam, often forced to fight are not their enemy, and they deserve at least some respect for having to risk what they did. And contrasting with a little bit today, where you have a lot of the people who are in the military, and it's pretty obvious, like we haven't had a real, the war on terror, I guess, is like the justification for a lot of people joining up. But a lot of these vets coming back are saying that was a lie, and they know it was a lie. Terror. And then the people who are still joining, those are the ones that I have less respect for. The people.
It's a pure mercenary force today. I mean, you join because you don't want to pay for your daughter to go to school, so she joins the army, and then they run trains on her while she's in the army.
That's okay. So let's be fair to the average 18-year-old from, some suburb of Tulsa or something who joins the army. Like, not everybody is woke.
It's true. Like, if you go to Middle America, they still believe they're in America, and it's charming.
Let's also be cognizant that for a lot, like, I forget what the proportion is, but I think it's well into the double digits of enlistees have a family member in the military. Like, it ends up being kind of a quasi hereditary institution.
Yeah, it's a caste. There's an army caste.
The people that I think you should have significantly less respect for are the people who, for instance, the upper rungs of the officer corps, who have as their supposed mission the employment of these forces for productive ends and don't even have the grace to resign as their men are routinely killed for no good goddamn reason, simply because they, are waiting for their next assignment, or the right slot at Boeing hasn't quite opened up yet.
Yeah,
I have
no issue with random private who joins up and just happens to end up fighting a war for Israel.
Right. My personal position on that, like, I don't. I would just take kind of a neutral perspective to those enlistees, and then my position on them personally, or respect, would be what they have to say afterwards. If they, if you can spend 4 years or whatever in one of these deserts, and you can come to no meaningful conclusions about what your masters are having you do. I mean, it's not even necessarily a moral issue. I do question your intelligence, though.
Well,
I mean,
there's that. There's also the idea that like people think that, or people like to pretend that it's honorable. I mean, look, I'm a mercenary. At best, I'm a mercenary, not in a combat sense, but people have this idea that like their kids joining the military so that, whatever, they're protecting our freedoms. But I mean, let's be honest, they're just doing it for, not just, but they're doing it for the payoff. And, everyone has to live. It's tough to make a living in this country, but it's not like some virtuous thing. It's just,
yeah, I agree completely, and it's a lie that people tell themselves, and that's perpetuated by the system and the media.
Well, did you guys see the Army-Navy game that happened this weekend? I thought it was fascinating because
that was pretty funny.
The sort of
the crowds were
pomp
wearing.
And circumstance around it, and the police who were actually part of it as well in the audience, they were all in full uniform. So it's interesting how the media or the system tries to portray these forces as kind of one kind of big happy family.
The funniest aspect.
Paint the picture for me a bit more. I don't understand.
So Army Navy fight this football game, and it's basically
West Point, right?
I don't know where it is, but it was snowing, and that was apparently kind of a freak incident. It may have been in Texas, but everybody was dressed up in full uniform in the audience and the police force, and the Army and Navy are just in regular football outfits, but they just they have a lot of nationalism, or at least civic nationalism in the case of America, in this thing. And I was joking, did they take a knee during the national anthem? I mean, I don't think so, but the whole point of this ultimately is propaganda for the authority of the forces of the government.
There's a funny aspect to that. So the Russian ambassador wrote a letter to the I think it was the Secretary of the Army, where he was talking about we're really glad that we have such a cooperative relationship with the U.S. fighting ISIS in Syria, and we appreciate the sacrifices that the U.S. Army has made in their alliance with us. So we'd like to take this opportunity to say that although we respect the U.S. Navy very much, go Army in your delightful football game.
They've become such good trolls.
Yeah, that was
holy shit.
My God, that's
funny.
That is a from orbit tungsten penetrator troll.
That is so good.
Deep at the heart of West Point.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, our State Department doesn't even get it. They're like, what? They can't even troll. They're just so lame. I mean, I don't know what it is. It's just maybe just too much power. They don't actually ever get their muscles tested.
They have a very prissy attitude towards their own moral superiority, where making fun of other nations, I think, they'd rather humiliate other nations than make fun of them. Which is a weird thing, because back in the Cold War, there was sort of an element of I don't know whether to call it good natured, but it was sort of like an element of self-referential mockery. You'd be talking about how in USSR, like, oh, you're still like eating your shoes or whatever, and the Russians would be talking about, yes, but you were hanging Negroes.
RT still does that to this day.
Yeah,
the Negro troll.
Yeah, that became like a sorry.
So, all right, so the Russians said, thanks, because the army is helping us beat ISIS in Syria, we're rooting for army in the game. I don't get it.
Right.
Well, the U.S. Army is not helping the Russians beat ISIS in Syria, but they pretend in the Donald Trump context too. It's like, oh, we're going to fight ISIS.
Yeah.
So it's
right. So the two jokes
just reminding them about there's two jokes going on at once.
It's like, yeah, sweet alliance guys. Like I really like the amount of effort that you're putting into crushing ISIS as they're airlifted into Israeli hospitals. But,
right, exactly.
the other aspect of the troll is the whole Russian collusion thing. That and
now they're colluding with the army football team rather.
Yeah, let us now collude with army to beat navy. It's part of our master plan for Middle Eastern domination.
I figured that was it. I just didn't find it very funny, I guess.
Oh man, it's funny.
Well, I guess neither did the State Department.
Well, they're not known for their sense of humor.
So where do we leave off with Rambo? Let's go back to the movie.
Well, they bring in the colonel, who informs them that they're all going to die if they don't, ease off the gas.
Wait! I have the sequence of dialogue. So I'm not here trying to protect Rambo from you. I'm trying to protect you from Rambo. And then the sheriff talks back and he says, "You think you can take on 200 men?" And then the colonel responds, "If you have that many, remember one thing." "Oh yeah, what's that?" "A good supply of body bags." Full propaganda.
And this repeats itself. There's a couple quips to this nature where he's reminding them how outgunned they are by Rambo. And so the colonel, he pleads with them to just let him go. We'll deal with it later. And it becomes the establishment of the downfall of Rambo's rampage, because the colonel provides the emotional link to the few things he has left. And it escalates. They bring in the National Guard, and it eventually moves into the town where the final confrontation happens. And he hits up the gun store, blows up the gas station. And then the sheriff eventually shows up on the roof, and there's a shootout with the sheriff.
So, can we talk about the colonel for a bit? Because I think he is a very interesting character, especially as he's explored in the other, I guess, 3 films.
He's portrayed as a father figure.
Yeah, he almost strikes me as. So he's portrayed as Rambo's only real friend, his kind of remaining link to
humanity,
the sort of legitimated place in society, and he's almost contrasted with Rambo in that Rambo is sort of traumatized by his service to the States, and the colonel is still in service to the States and is still sort of, I don't want to say exploiting, but he's enjoying the legitimacy that affiliation brings him. Whereas Rambo has no affiliation. He's explicitly a vagrant, a drifter, who really is only responsible to his own internal sense of honor, but he really doesn't owe anyone anything. I just think that's interesting. The sort of implicit message that sends about these
how
sorts
high
of
up is a colonel?
legitimating
How high up is a colonel in the military?
One level below 1-star general. He's a full bird colonel.
Exactly.
So it usually takes you if you're colloquially a full bird colonel. You're not a lieutenant colonel. Most, from what I remember, it takes you about 20 years, which is the amount of time that you have to spend before you can retire with full benefits to reach the level of lieutenant colonel, depending on how packed the pipeline is during the course of your career. So if you do become a colonel, you are sort of in it for the long haul. You're hoping probably to make general. You're commanding a fairly substantial number of troops at some point in your service. So you're sort of a big deal, and you're usually also at various points in some sort of a operational command. You're not just writing memos. So they tend to be, it's a big deal.
So I was just going to point out that given how big of a deal that is, it's not surprising that he has, more so than actually a special operations soldier, a polish to him that enables him to interact with the bureaucracy that is the Pentagon, which is arguably the largest in the world, and it's got over 1 million people under its purview. And if you're able to navigate that, in addition to a little bit of combat history, which is normally their track as well, you're pretty diplomatic compared to a guy like Rambo, who's basically been thrown into the jungle behind enemy lines and having to fight his way back every time the Huey drops him off for his hunter-killer mission. And so he's very capable of bridging all the different facets of the story together and the characters involved.
It should be noted he was actually originally going to be played by Isur Danielovich, Kirk Douglas.
Well,
that would have worked.
Yeah, he's a strong, figure.
Well, he's played military figures before in films like Paths of Glory.
Although I would expect
there was a dispute over the script, and that's why Douglas left.
I would expect Douglas to be more stern and not as much of a concerned person with a guy like Rambo. At least according to Michael Douglas, who actually was his son. It was a very difficult relationship they had. And I don't know how much empathy that a guy like that could have for somebody like Rambo, if you see that at all in the film, which I think I do. It's played by Richard Crenna. He was never, I guess, a kind of a military actor. He was more of a kind of a normal guy actor. So it was an interesting casting choice. But I thought he did pretty well. I thought it was somewhat convincing.
Well, the casting, there was a lot. I mean, Stallone was not originally supposed to be Rambo. They wanted all kinds of different people for it. At one point, considering Steve McQueen and I think De Niro. Who else? Clint Eastwood. Yeah, Robert Mitchum was another possibility.
Clint Eastwood would have been.
Mitchum would have been the sheriff, which would have been interesting. Was Clint going to be... Yeah, Clint was discussed for the lead. It was Mitchum that they were considering for the sheriff.
Clint could have done it, but I don't think he could have garnered as much empathy or sympathy from the audience, because I don't think he could have been actually convincing as sort of a broken man. He's never really portrayed that. He's always kind of a tough
Stallone
guy.
Stallone has always had... There's this...
He's the underdog.
Ability for the underdog from Rambo, and he's got forceps face, right? So he's like, it triggers your retard sympathy. We all feel sympathy for the unfairly retarded, and he like Copland is another great example of that. He's a very sympathetic, kind of hapless character. He's ultimately kind of a tough guy. I mean, he ends up having to shoot it out in the end of that movie, but he is a very he's like a retard, and that's it's the sympathy for that. Sympathy for the retard, for the damaged individual.
Well, in the case of Rambo, I mean, he's just socially alienated. I don't know if he's retarded, but it's basically
No, I'm talking about Copland with the
Yeah,
Okay.
people don't look at Sylvester Stallone and think retard. I just don't think that's how they.
he talks funny according to some people. I think it's whatever. I never thought of it that
Yeah,
way.
It's got forceps face. He was pulled out
Right.
of the womb by forceps, and that's why he has that
Right.
Well,
that deformity.
I think it shaped him as a.
I mean,
as
he
a
was
person,
originally
though.
cast. If you know much about the so Stallone was originally cast just as like ugly bad guy. That was his whole career in Hollywood, and then
I thought
like
his
the
first movie was a
Rambo.
porno.
That
Yeah.
too, yeah. But the Rambo, or sorry, Rocky. The story behind Rocky is kind of long, but it was this whole ordeal. He read it like in one night after watching this fight between some white Cajun guy and I think Ali. He read it in like 36 hours or something, shopped it around. People really liked the script, but he demanded that if they accept his script, that they let him star in the lead role, which was a non-starter. However, he was very determined. And so originally, I mean, they were willing to pay him like, I think 6 figures.
Yeah, it's like
for
a
the script.
$250,000.
Yeah, and then with that demand, it kept going down,
and his
down,
wife
down.
was like going to leave him at that point because he hadn't been able to.
Well,
sell
he sold his
anything.
dog too.
Yeah.
And that dog, the story behind the dog is kind of funny because he sold his dog at a convenience store to some guy. And once he finally got them to accept letting him star, he had to take, like, the contract was like kind of insane. Like he was going to take a hit for certain losses. I don't know exactly how it worked out, but it was, it ended up being, I think, $20,000 or something. And so he shows up, finds the guy with the dog, and is like starting to haggle him back for the dog. And so the guy gets, he gets wise to the fact that, well, this guy's coming to some money. What's going on? So he extorts him for like quite a significant amount of money to get the dog back and demands a part in the movie. So both the dog and the guy who bought the dog were in Rocky.
Right.
But yeah, Stallone like kind of willed his way into Hollywood, into like a starring man kind of role.
Yeah, when you're willing to sell your dog to make it, that shows a level of commitment.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, he was never like, that's my point here, is like he was never the first choice for like leading man roles, and he ended up kind of earning the love of the audience
so well.
as people. Yeah, no, that's what
Yeah. People like him because of that. It's the triumph of the will.
He projects this. He projects this in both Rambo and the Rocky films. He projects this role of like the man who sort of forges himself because he's obliged to into a perfect instrument.
Yeah,
but still damaged. I mean, like, because ultimately, like I left off in the timeline here with he gets in a shootout with the sheriff, and sheriff falls through the roof, dead. I believe he's dead, right? No, he's not, because Rambo's going to finish him off, and that's when the colonel talks him out of this by triggering effectively his sort of emotions, and so that's when he has the bit, it's never over, and he goes on and talks about how he's spit on and called baby killer and all this, and his final kind of breakdown, something that of course never happens in the rest of the Rambo series. He transforms from this, sort of semi-complex, or at least multi-layered killer slash someone who still has some humanity and heart to him. He's just trying to kind of get along, and he's getting pushed by the local piggies and to this into like a full-fledged action hero.
Well, the second one, there's a little bit of
charging at Russian attack helicopters on a horseback in the third one.
There's some double crossing in the second one, and at the end he still displays a little bit of what he does in the first, but I think there is an evolution.
That's true. In the second one, there is the kind of outburst at the end where he's double crossed, and does he kill the guy?
No, he stabs the knife right by his face, though.
Right by his face. Yeah, right.
I have to say, I've always admired Stallone's taste in sort of visuals, and he picks out these knives actually for all the Rambo movies, and he has them custom made. So if you want to buy a knife, you can get one of those, but they're all different. And I think the last one, just Rambo, was basically just a machete because he was hacking his way through all these enemies. As opposed to the
in
other
Burma?
ones, wherever it was, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Burma. Yeah, I know. I mean, not my favorite of the series in terms of fun. I think I was saying before the show that would be the third one. That movie's hilarious. But, you know, it's probably the best of the series. I think it
has the most to say that it's of relevance to society. I think it's the most socially significant.
It's the most artistically worthy of the Rambo films, for sure. What else would we say? I mean, have we said everything? What else should be covered? There's the scene about the media. I kind of feel like not motivated to talk about that at this point, though.
I think you already kind of covered it. I was going to say that, you know, in a little bit the way you did, about how the media was portraying this madman on the loose.
Oh, yeah.
And they claimed in the report that he had killed the deputy with a weapon, which wasn't the case.
Nearly killed 6 other police.
Yeah, and it was like, and we expect him to be captured, you know, in a few hours.
Well, we never really mentioned, the extent to which Rambo goes to not kill is one of the main dynamics, at least the first 70% of the movie, because, I mean, he wounds people very badly, but
he's very MacGyver-like in the sort of forest scene, where he's setting traps, and actually some of those traps are interesting because the Vietnamese did set those types of traps for the Americans, and so for a guy like this to actually know how to make those is somewhat realistic. Now the time he had, it's a little bit Hollywood, but they do illustrate some of that very interestingly, and he takes steps to basically give people a chance to get away. And especially with the sheriff, he basically corners them with his knife and he says, "Look, you know, you started this. Now it's your turn to stop it.
You drew first blood."
Right, and the whole concept of first blood is interesting, and it's basically essentially, I think, a simplification or compression.
The myth of the first blood,
the honor code. Yeah. It's like who is, you know, right. It's basically the person who is defending themselves rather than kind of attacking, I guess. That's the sort of morality embedded in that statement.
And that's the thing when you get into a situation with the system and their escalation, right or wrong doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if David Koresh was in the right or not. At this point, the system can't show any weakness. It has to defend its total monopoly on violence, and it has to defend the fact that any violence it engages in is legitimate. So it just doubles down and kills all these people.
John Rambo, a drifter, just passing through their town.
Morning! Headed north or south?
North.
Now jump in. I'll make sure you're heading the right direction, huh?
You got someplace I can eat around here?
There's a diner about 30 miles up the highway.
Is there any law against me getting something here?
Yeah, me. I want you to book this gentleman for vagrancy, resisting arrest, carrying a concealed weapon.
They knew he was innocent.
Starting to dislike you. A lot.
And they didn't give a damn.
That's okay, Warren. Don't worry about the soap. He's tough. Just shave him. Try. Don't move. I don't want you to cut your own throat.
John Rambo, one man who's been pushed too far.
You're finished! You've gone as far as you're gonna go! Heading straight for the top. Right on top of him. There's no way out of here except through us.
He was hunted. Trapped.
There he is! On the cliff!
And forced to fight back.
Don't push it. Don't push it. I'll give you a war you won't believe.
Teasel, you and all your men couldn't handle him before. Now, what makes you think you can handle him now?
Because God knows what damage he's prepared to do.
You don't seem to want to accept the fact that you're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare.
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
You send that many, don't forget one thing. A good supply of body bags.
Sylvester Stallone. This time, he's fighting for his life. First Blood.